foundation, as some of you know, with diligent research, like opening your copy of Freedom Daily and reading when the foundation was founded, will recognize the fact that FFF was founded in 1989. A little bit of math, maybe even government school math, will help you figure out that this is FFF's 21st year. You have, in fact, you are witness with this dinner tonight, the fact that FFF has come of age, at least officially and chronologically. But FFF came of age long before this evening or this year. It came of age at a time when George Herbert Walker Bush, the father, had just taken the oath of office of President of the United States in January of 1989 after promising the American people, read my lips, no new taxes. In 1990, while FFF was still in its infancy, as it were, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and George Herbert Walker Bush decided it was time, not that there was any oil in Kuwait, you understand, not that there was any in Iraq, that it was time to kick Saddam Hussein out. And so the man who had been the dictator in Iraq, who had been the friend of the American administration in the 80s while they were fighting Iran, suddenly became a pariah. And FFF recognized the transition and condemned the United States government for its involvement in the Middle East over oil. FFF through the years, and Jim Ward neatly addressed some of that early on in talking about the Clinton administration and Hillary's attempt to force national health care through. The FFF continued to oppose the socialization, the takeover of the American economy by one administration after another. Now, in anticipation of the fact that we were cutting an anniversary cake now, we asked a couple of people that we know if they would say a word or two about FFF. And actually we got a couple of responses that we thought were quite interesting. One of them is from a gentleman who is actually here this evening who did not think he would be here, but circumstances contrived to persuade him that it would be more interesting to be in here than in Alaska on an extended vacation. So these words: congratulations, Bumper, on my past first cross into John Bumper had before FFF at the Foundation for Economic Education in Irvington-on-Hudson in New York. On our past first cross at FE in the mid-1980s, it was obvious to me that you were destined to do great things. You clearly demonstrated that you not only possessed a true passion for liberty, but you also possessed the determination and energy to unequivocally defend it. Under your guidance, the Future of Freedom Foundation has become a first-class operation. It has accomplished huge things in its 21 years, and it will undoubtedly continue to do the same for many years to come. You are to be highly commended. Again, congratulations for work well done, and that's from Bud Rule.
Wow.
From a colleague in Liberty, Dear Bumper, thank you for all your work for liberty, and especially for founding the Future of Freedom Foundation 21 years ago. Every libertarian in this whole world is in your debt. Now get cracking on the next 21 years. That's signed Lou Rockwell.
Wow.
And this one, I love Jake and all his work and wish I could attend, but I will be out of town this weekend. Thanks for thinking of me. and that's from Andrew J. Napolitano.
Wow.
I want at the moment to recognize a gentleman who many of you know, long-time involvement with the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania, who would have been here this evening, except he ran into a small complication. About 3 years ago, the federal court convicted him of not filing his voluntary income tax form the way the IRS wanted him to fill out that voluntary income tax form. And they sentenced him to about 27 months in one of their federal prisons. Art Farnsworth was paroled, a bit ironically, on April 15th of 2009. His parole officer decided that he ought to go back to prison because in a very, very short list of things that Art did that she did not approve of was that at Christmas time of last year, he went from his home near Philadelphia to visit his own parents in New York without her permission. So yesterday, he went back to federal prison. Jim Bogart has been chronicling that kind of abuse for years. And Bumper certainly knows that it happens to people who stand up for their libertarian principles and do what they say they're going to do and act on their beliefs. Bumper has been successful for 21 years with a very small organization, a very tenacious organization, in preaching liberty to power. And with that, Jacob Hornberger.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a big honor to be introduced by Ken. He and I go back many, many years and fought a lot of good, solid battles in our Libertarian Party activity together, and we've been such close friends. You know, I don't know if we're going to win this battle for liberty, but darn sure one of the nice byproducts of it is that we make such good friendships. And, of course, the coolest people are in the Libertarians compared to the statists. And of course, Bob and I go back so many years too, I guess to my fee days, and it's an honor that Bob's on our Board of Trustees at the Future of Freedom Foundation now, and I just want to thank him for putting on this event, along with Pat. Thank you so much, and Michael for bringing us together, and Ken, all the hard work. You know, we put these kind of things on at FFF, and have for 21 years, and I know how much work goes into doing them. It's just so nice to be able to just come in, have everything already done. And so I want to thank y'all for all the work. I mean, I know how much work goes into this, and thank you for coming. I mean, I know it's not an inexpensive evening in terms of time and money and so forth, and it's nice. I know most of you are probably choir members, but I want you to know I love preaching to the choir, and some of you are good supporters of the Future of Freedom Foundation. We wouldn't be here without those of you that support us. I mean, we cannot do it without your donations and your subscriptions to Freedom Daily and your gift subscriptions, and we thank you for that. And those of you that are not yet donating, we'd love to have your support. That's how we're able to do this. Now, we don't want to be around another 21 years. We want to put ourselves out of business. And we want to do that by achieving the free society. Now, let me preface my talk to tell you that I've been under the weather for a week now. I've been in bed for 3 days and just feeling horrible. And so this morning I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to pull this off? So I went to the pharmacist and told her my problem, and she gave me some really good drugs. And so I haven't been shaking hands with people in deference to that, and I apologize for that. I didn't want to spread any germs around. I hope you'll bear with me on my talk, too, that if I'm not on tonight, it can cut me a little slack. If I praise socialism or whatever, you'll know what's going on. But speaking of illness, we're living in a society in which the economic conditions are pretty ill, and we're talking about something that's not just a common cold. We're talking about really a cancerous, malignant tumor on the body politic. We're living in a society in which everyone here knows that government spending is soaring through the roof. They're spending much more than they're taking in. And there's no light at the end of this tunnel. Government debt is absolutely skyrocketing. They're running up a credit card in Washington on which there is no limit. And it's drawn on your account. And for years they've gone through this nonsense of don't worry, you can pass it to your children, you can pass it to your grandchildren, it's all free. Don't worry. In the long run, everyone's dead except your children and grandchildren who will have to pay the debt. No longer. Now the system has reached a tipping point where all of us are now going to be affected. You've got the state is saying all you got to do is raise taxes. Tax the rich. Tax the rich. Raise taxes on the middle class. But you see, who can handle that? I mean, all the people I know are just struggling to make ends meet. Nobody's saving any money out of their income. They're just making good, making expenses. Who can handle more taxes, and especially a significant amount of taxes that's going to be paying off a debt that may very well be closer to default than we think. And of course, the printing presses of the Federal Reserve are cranking up what they've done for decades, printing more and more debased currency to pay off that debt, but with a collision forming on the horizon because the Chinese Communist regime that they borrowed the money from to fund their imperial enterprises in Iraq and Afghanistan are saying, this time you're not going to pay us back in debased dollars. You're going to pay us in full force, full value dollars that we loaned to you. This cannot end good. There is a perfect storm forming on this horizon. And we've been saying this for 21 years at FFS. From the very beginning, we've said this is the road to serfdom. This is the road to servitude. This is the road to bankruptcy. This is the road to moral debauchery. This is what libertarians have been saying. And that's the end of this road. That's the road we're heading on. It's the road to Greece. The road to bankruptcy. It is the road to Rome and the Roman Empire. It cannot end well. Especially because the people who are on the receiving end of the government programs on which all this money is being spent refuse to let go of any of that goal. Just like in Greece. At the same time, we now live in a country in which the President of the United States, whether he's a Democrat or Republican, has the power to assassinate his own people. He has the power to assassinate Americans overseas and Americans on American soil. That is an extraordinary power. They have to get search warrants to search a person's home. They don't need a warrant to execute an American. All they need is a label called enemy combatant. That's it. That label comes from a team of bureaucrats or a single bureaucrat. It is non-reviewable. It is conclusive. And as Jim was saying earlier, they have the power to torture not just foreigners, they have the power to torture Americans. To do everything they did at Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay to Americans. Not only overseas, but right here on American soil. Is this the kind of country that our American ancestors brought into existence in 1787? Is this something that they would recognize? Is this what they had in mind? That the president would have these powers? That that's the kind of country they were setting forth as a model for the world? A country where debt skyrocketing, spending skyrocketing, inflation. I want to talk to you about two things tonight. One of them I think most of us will agree on. The other one is going to be more controversial. I want to talk to you about two aspects of liberty that are critically important. And this is the battle of our age. You know, every generation has its challenges. This is our challenge. These two aspects of liberty. If we lose on either one, there are going to be severe adverse consequences for you, your children, and your grandchildren. I want to talk to you about economic liberty, and I want to talk to you about civil liberties. And I want to tell you why the Future of Freedom Foundation has been spending the amount of time on both those aspects of liberty for 21 years. Now, what is economic liberty? It's simply a concept that says that everybody has a right to keep everything he earns. Belongs to you. You earned it. You went out and produced it in the business world, satisfied consumers. Your money belongs to you. And you have a right to decide what to do with it. You have a right not only to keep it, but to decide what to do with it. You have a right to enter into any business you want to without asking the permission of any government official. You want to hang up a shingle? You want to start selling widgets? The only person who's going to decide whether you stay in business or not is the consumer. He's the sovereign. He decides whether you're going to stay in business or not. But you need no permit, no license, no anything. So you enter into business without permission, you keep everything you earn, you decide what to do with it. If you want to invest it, that's your business. You want to give it to the poor, that's your business. You want to donate it to a good cause, you want to save it, you want to hoard it, put it under your mattress, it belongs to you. That's economic liberty. Now let's talk about the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson tells us in the Declaration that we're all endowed with certain fundamental, inherent, God-given natural rights. These include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They had taken this terminology from the English philosopher John Locke in his second treatise on government, who had said life, liberty, and property, a phrase that was applied in the Fifth Amendment and later in the 14th Amendment. What Jefferson is saying is that we don't have to be thankful to government for our rights, because our rights are God-given. They're natural. They don't come from government. Now, we all understand this concept that certain rights are not subject to majority vote. You know, freedom of speech. We don't put, the right to whether you should speak or not, or what you read, or where you go to church and so forth, up for majority vote. I mean, even if Congress passed a law saying, 95% of congressmen have said that we've done a public opinion poll and everybody feels, or 95% of the American people feel that everyone should go to church on Sunday. And so we're going to pass this law that everybody goes to church on Sunday. Every one of us would recognize that that's a violation of fundamental rights. Whether you go to church or not, it's not up to majority vote. It's not what a democracy is about. That's where the concept of economic liberty comes in. This is what the statists, the socialists cannot understand. That what I do with my money, what I do with my life is as sacred as whether I go to church on Sunday or not. Or who I speak out against, or what books I read. That it's not subject to majority vote, because it belongs to you. That your talents and your abilities, whatever it is that you're satisfying consumers doing, whether it's a person doing janitor work in a factory or a CEO in a top Wall Street firm, that your talents and abilities belong to you. And these are just as God-given and as sacred as any other fundamental right. Now, our battle is against the statists. Because obviously, and this is the battle of our age, it's not left versus right, as we often hear on television and in the newspapers. It's really a battle of libertarians versus statists. Because the statists say, oh, no. What you do with your money is subject to majority vote. And they effectively nationalize income with the income tax. They said the entire country, whatever's produced, belongs to the government. We will decide how much of your money you're going to be permitted to keep. They set the percentage, like an allowance. A parent gives a child an allowance. The more honest method really would be where everybody sends 100% of their money to Washington and then they send back what they want you to have. Because that's exactly what's happening ever since they enacted an income tax. Because the statist concept is we can't tolerate people that make bad choices. Because you see, children might not honor their mother and father if there wasn't Social Security and their parents needed the help. We can't handle that kind of wrong decision. People might not handle their own retirement. They might be irresponsible and just spend it on booze all their life. We can't handle that. You see it in the drug war, this 35-year-old failed, immoral, destructive war that they're still waging. They cannot stand the thought that somebody's going to make an irresponsible choice by doing something that's harmful to themselves. You see, the libertarian says, what is freedom? Freedom entails the right to make bad decisions, bad choices, as long as your choices don't involve violence or fraud against another person. As long as you're not murdering, raping, stealing, or whatever, you're free to do whatever you want in your life. Because if you're not free to make the bad choices, the irresponsible choices, the risky choices, the dangerous choices, the bad choices, then you're not free. And that's why libertarians have always called for the end of the drug war. Not because it's just so destructive, but because you as an individual have this fundamental God-given right to live your life the way you want. And that includes what you do with your money. And so we don't force people to care for the poor. We don't force people to fund the elderly in Social Security. We don't force people to fund the poor with Medicare or Medicaid. We say, let the market ferret this out, knowing that this is the key to a prosperous society and also to a charitable society, one in which people are voluntarily helping others. Now, when you look at our society from 1787, from the time the Constitution called the government into existence, you see some very interesting things. Now, why did they call government into existence? Well, a lot of them weren't very excited about this idea. They didn't trust the idea of government officials, not even when they were run by Washington or Jefferson or Madison or those kind of people. A lot of them weren't too excited about leaving the Articles of Confederation where there was a very weak federal government. But they said, we're going to call government into existence, but with very limited powers. It was an extraordinary experiment in political science. They said, we'll call you into existence, but these are your powers. They're very, very limited. Well, there were some tragic exceptions to the violations of liberty. Slavery, of course, was the biggest one, and we learned the price that society paid for that abandonment of principle, an enormous price. Hundreds of thousands of people killed later on. There were tariffs. There were land grants to the railroads. There were grants to the canals. There was lots of minor regulations. But by and large, this was the most unusual society in history. And what they accomplished, perhaps just as a byproduct, because, they didn't have Ludwig von Mises to study. They didn't have Friedrich Hayek. They didn't have Milton Friedman. The only thing they really had was Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, and that really isn't a model of clarity. And so really what they formed was this unusual society with no income tax, virtually no regulations, certainly not at the national level. So people were free for the first time in history to accumulate unlimited amounts of wealth. And through this system, they figured out something that the liberals have been trying to do through the welfare state for decades. They figured out how to abolish poverty. Because if you look from 1787 all the way around to the late 1800s, it's the most extraordinary period in history in terms of economic growth. The statists say, the Industrial Revolution was horrible and so forth. Nonsense. Not compared to what was going on before. The reason people were sending their wives and children into the factories wasn't because they hated them. It's because that was the only way to survive in a society where there was no capital. But as each generation was going along, they were saving money. They were bringing capital into existence. Real wage rates were rising. In one 20-year period in the late 1800s, they doubled. Real wage rates, not inflation. Doubled. The poor were escaping the bounds of poverty for the first time in history. No immigration controls. I mean, people were flooding in to the land where there was no Social Security, no Medicare, no welfare, no unemployment compensation. You were on your own. And the poor were flooding into this land, leaving the lands of government security. Oh, and by the way, when people were not forced to care for the poor, you had the most charitable society in history. It was the multimillionaires and the middle class that were now accumulating this massive amount of capital, of wealth. They were building the museums, the opera houses. It's extraordinary. I mean, this is what made America so different. But through it all, and especially in the 1800s, the battle started between the statists and the economic libertarians. And the battle took place on all levels, and especially in the Supreme Court. This battle over whether markets would be free of government control, whether America would be free of socialism and statism, or whether we would continue this great experiment of just massive capital accumulation through the 20th century. And that battle raged at all levels in the early 1900s, and ultimately culminating in 1937 in a Supreme Court case called West Coast Hotel versus Parrish. It was a battle that the socialists won, that the statists won. Now, they like to portray the New Deal as saving free enterprise. Minor reforms that reform free enterprise. Nonsense. It's a lie. It's a delusion. This was a revolutionary change in American society. The primary purpose of the federal government became, during the New Deal, to take money from one group of people and give it to another group of people. And to regulate economic activity. If you look at Roosevelt's Blue Eagle campaign and his National Industrial Recovery Act, it was a mirror image of what was going on in Benito Mussolini's fascist Italy. If you look at his Social Security plan, which was a straight transfer program, there's never been a fund, never been a Social Security fund from the beginning. That first generation of Social Security recipients, they were taking money from the young and the productive and giving it to them because they didn't put anything into the system. And that's the way it's been, generation after generation. They did it to me, I'm going to do it to the young people that are now living today. And I don't care what happens, they're going to have to figure it out. And the insidiousness of this thing is not only now where we are today on the verge of national bankruptcy, out of control spending, debt rising. The insidiousness is what it's done to the American spirit. Because there's most Americans, many Americans, at least many, honestly think that we could never survive without this socialist junk. You ask them about repealing Social Security. I could never live without Social Security. Why, there'd be people dying in the streets. Why, Medicare and Medicaid, which of course were socialist programs modeled on Social Security, we could never do without Medicare and Medicaid. Oh, no, we need these socialist programs. Oh, education grants. How would people get educated without public schooling and education grants? It has destroyed the sense of can-do, of self-reliance, of independence, of believing in ourselves and believing in others and believing in markets and believing in freedom and believing in other people. I mean, you talk about voluntary charity people and say, they never give. That's why we need to force them with the welfare state. That's what it's done. That's the battle we're facing. It's a battle that we have fought for 21 years to restore the idea of economic liberty in this land. The other battle, the more controversial one, is civil liberties. We have focused on civil liberties for 21 years. If you go back to our website on fff.org and you look, I think it's the April issue of 1990, I wrote an essay called The Forgotten Importance of Civil Liberties. And the whole issue was devoted to civil liberties. They're great essays. They're worth looking at. Now, why have we done this? And especially since 9/11. I mean, we've gotten calls from people, letters from people. Why are you guys focusing on civil liberties? What's the deal? How come you're not going to just focus on economic liberties? Well, I'm going to explain it to you tonight. Why we've done this. Because you see, arguably, not even arguably, civil liberties are actually much more important in terms of a free human being than economic liberty. Let me make a trade with you. Suppose I'm a dictator. This is the trade I'm going to offer you. I will give you economic liberty. You can have it. I'll put a constitutional amendment in that says you keep everything you earn, no income tax. You keep it all. I'll let you have the Second Amendment too. You keep your guns. But never will government officials touch your guns. I'll give you freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom of religion. You got it all. We won't touch any of that. What I want in return is just a very small power. I want the power to be able to send my forces into your house, take you into custody whenever I want, and cart you and your daughter and your son and your wife off to a concentration camp where I have the power to do whatever I want to them. How about that for a trade? You see, that's what we're fighting about. Let's go back to the Constitution now. When they brought in the Constitution, when they brought in this government, it was a government they didn't trust. But the American people said, even that's not good enough for us. We want you to pass a Bill of Rights as a condition for letting this federal government come into existence. Now, why do they need a Bill of Rights? They said the powers are enumerated. Don't worry. They said, we're worried. We want to enumerate rights. But it really should have been called a Bill of Prohibitions, because it really doesn't give rights. The Bill of Rights does not give rights, because remember, rights pre-exist government. So it's really prohibiting government from interfering with rights. That's what the First Amendment is. That's what the Second Amendment is. But if you look at it closely, you'll notice something very unusual about the Bill of Rights. There's something different about the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments. They're totally different. Because there's nothing like natural about them. The right to be free of unreasonable searches and seizures. The right to be free from cruel and unusual punishments. The right not to be taken from your home without a warrant. The right not to be punished without a jury trial. Why did our ancestors demand such things? Because they knew that the federal government would inevitably attract people that would do that sort of thing. That's why they wanted it enumerated. Because the federal government attracts people that are statists. They're socialists. They're tyrants. They're little dictators. It's in their DNA. They can't help themselves. And so it's like alcoholism. They gravitate to this power surge where they say, whatever I can do to satisfy this urge to control, to plunder, to loot, to put people in jail, to torture them. And that's why they put those restrictions in there. They're like barbed wire entanglements. People said, but there's going to be a lot of guilty people that go free in these. When you go out and start grabbing people, yeah, there's going to be guilty people go free. But better that 10 guilty people go free than one innocent man be convicted and wrongfully incarcerated. That was their attitude. These were a strange, unusual people, our American ancestors. But that's the restrictions they put, because they knew that this is what government had done. They had just rebelled against an empire that had done these things to people. When we talk about habeas corpus, when we talk about due process of law, we're talking about things that go back to like Magna Carta. That's where the phrase due process of law originated. And the reason the great barons of England held King John at the point of a sword and extracted from him the Great Charter was because they said, you will not seize us and send us to the Tower of London to be tortured without due process of law. They knew that this is what happened, that the king would send people into the Tower of London to be tortured. And not just terrorists, not just bad people, people who had the audacity to criticize the government or that worship the wrong way. They knew that this is what happens when you give government the power to do bad things to bad people, that inevitably it spills over into the good people. You know, even today, you look at the front page of the New York Times, and you got the Russian government that is involved in the execution of its own citizens, the government officials themselves. This is what government does. This is why it's so dangerous. People ask us, why are you defending Jose Padilla? He's a terrorist. By gosh, how come you're defending this man? Well, let me explain it to you. Because you see, these guys in the government are not dumb. When they're going after somebody to make a test case, they're going to go after the most unsympathetic person that they can find. They're not going to go after the high school principal. They're not even going to go after a libertarian who's criticizing the government, because we might get some sympathy if they did that to us. They go after the most unsympathetic guy. You know, every criminal defense lawyer will tell you, why does he go out and defend the worst murderer, accused of murder? Because he's not only defending that murderer, he's defending you in the process. And when we took up this cause of Jose Padilla, we're not defending Jose Padilla per se. We're defending every single libertarian, every single critic of government. Because you see, when they got the right to do what they did to Padilla, when they won that right, and they won it, they won the right to do to you everything they did to him. You see, because he's an American. He's an accused terrorist. And they said, our accusation is conclusive. Conclusive. And they tortured him. They subjected him to mental torture, the type of torture they had learned from the Korean communists, which is much worse than physical torture, because it damages your mind. And they do that with the intent to damage mind. Isolation, sensory deprivation, that's what those weird goggles they had on the guy were. We defend that case because that was the test case for every American. What they did to Padilla and what they won in the Court of Appeals never reached the Supreme Court. Because that's when they converted him back to a criminal defendant. They now have the right to do to every single American, every person in this room. That's what Obama has the right to do. To seize you out of your home. Oh, you got the right to keep your guns. He's not going to touch your guns. But he's got the right to come and get you. All he needs is the right crisis. That's why we've always taken a consistent approach. Don't ever give George W. Bush this power, we said. Assume that your worst enemy is going to end up with the power. Now, what was the real gravamen of what they did here? I mean, they're ingenious. These statists are absolutely ingenious. Because you see, what they did at 9/11, they said, 9/11 changed the world. It changed the world. It didn't change anything with respect to what they had been doing in foreign policy. What it changed was how they handled this criminal case of terrorism. Now, we can sit here and argue, is terrorism a criminal offense? Is it an act of war? Is it terrorism? Blah, blah, blah. It's a totally academic debate. Why? Because terrorism is a criminal offense. That's just a fact. Why do you think people are indicted in federal district court for terrorism? It's because it's in the U.S. Code. It's always been a criminal offense. It's not a question of, it's an act of war. No. It is a criminal offense. That's why they converted Padilla from enemy combatant to federal criminal court defendant. That's why they got Zacharias Moussaoui convicted in federal district court. So everybody agrees it's a federal criminal offense. So what's so unique about this situation? What's unique is the ingenuity of these guys. Because you see, what they did was they took a federal criminal offense and converted it at their option into an act of war. It's no different, for example, on the drug war. If all of a sudden, Obama sent troops down to the border, I'm sure everybody here knows now, sent troops down to wage the war on drugs, the war on immigrants, the war on guns. All three wars at the same time. Now, suppose those drug dealers over there start doing on the American side what they've been doing on the Mexican side, assassinating federal officials, bombing federal buildings, and say El Paso and Laredo and the border towns. There's just mayhem down there. And U.S. troops are down there fighting them in the cities. Does that convert drug offenses into an act of war? Well, you see, that's exactly what they did with respect to the war on terror, the so-called war. They took a federal criminal offense, and with all the fear and the hype and everybody's legs were quaking after 9/11, they said, we declare war on terror. Even though, Ronald Reagan had declared war on terror. They declared war on a criminal offense. And they said, now this frees us from the Bill of Rights. Wow. I mean, they've made assaults on the Bill of Rights, those amendments I mentioned, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th, in the drug war for years. But now, this is a total circumvention of the Bill of Rights. And they just figured out a way to totally ignore those restrictions. And now that the precedent's been established, where they now have the power, make no mistake about it, they wield the power to come into your house and take you, your children, and whatever. If you think that power, when it starts being exercised, doesn't have an effect on freedom of speech, think again. There's going to be a lot of quiet people if that power starts being exercised, not just against the Padillas, but against other people, the critics of government, like the Iranian government does, like the Russian government does, like the Chinese government does. That's the core of the problem here. You cannot constrain government. You cannot say they'll only go after the bad guys. Because you see, our founding fathers, our framers of the Constitution said, in order to determine whether somebody's a bad guy, you're going to have to go through these barbed wire entanglements. You're going to have to go through a grand jury indictment. You're going to have to go through a jury trial. You're going to have to go through due process of law. That's just the name of the game, and they figured out a way around it. And that's why this country is in serious trouble today. We've got economic liberty over here. We got civil liberties under assault. And this is our battle. This is the battle we're waging at FFF. This is why we have waged it on both fronts. It's not because we're supporting or defending the bad guys. It's because we're defending principles that affect every one of you, especially in dangerous times when it becomes dangerous to criticize government, as it became in World War I, and they were jailing people who were criticizing the war effort, criticizing the draft. Or in World War II, where they were rounding up people and putting them into concentration camps. This is why this battle is so critically important. Now, can we win this battle? I know there's a lot of people get discouraged over this thing, and because every time I say things can't get worse, they do. And I don't even say that anymore. But you see all kinds of great stuff. I mean, I've never seen more, rising up of libertarians than libertarianism, as I have of late. It's the most incredible thing, and to see young people and middle-aged people and old people gravitating to the libertarian cause. For years, the statists ignored us in the mainstream press. Now they're starting to attack us in their op-eds. I mean, it's fantastic because they're sensing a threat. Now, I've been in this thing long enough where I know I'm a dyed-in-the-wool statist. I'm never going to convert. I'm resigned to that. You just can't convert people. But so sometimes I get attacking emails, and I'll come right back and just hit them hard because I figured, well, they're reading my email, I'm planting seeds into their mind. They don't know what I'm doing, but when they read my email, they know that that stuff's coming in. And so there's a chance that people can change themselves when you plant these seeds of liberty. But really, what I think this whole quest is just finding people, finding libertarians that say, my gosh, this is the way I feel. I think people should have a right to keep everything they earn. I think people should have civil liberties. I think the founders were right with the Bill of Rights. And they're gravitating to the libertarian cause. And I think what's going to happen on this thing, I think if things get worse and worse, and they are, you're seeing more and more lighting the darkness from the libertarian crowd. We've been in this a long time, decades. And you see this light starting to shine brighter and brighter. And so I think our quest is to find the libertarians, not to make them, but to find them. Where our numbers start getting larger and larger until such a point that you reach a critical mass in society that just tips society over into the free market side, into the freedom side. And I can't explain the sociological aspects of how this happens, but I know a man named W. Edwards Deming has described how this happens in a firm. And it doesn't even have to be a majority. All great movements have been led by a very small number of people. And they just grow and grow, and they reach a critical mass, maybe 20%, 25% of a company, and then all of a sudden the whole company just shifts. People start recognizing they're right, their paradigm's right. And that's what gives me hope, because I see this happening, and I see things getting stormier and darker, and as a hiker I say, my gosh, when you get to the mountaintop, things get stormier and darker the closer you get. And the fact that things are getting stormier and darker might be a really positive sign. And so how do we achieve this? I think it's just maintaining our principles. I've heard people in this movement say we got to water down our principles. We got to appeal to the masses. We got to, call for reductions in government spending instead of abolishing government programs. We got to, reform the military instead of dismantling the foreign military empire. Nonsense. We've got to restore the principles on which this country was founded. The spirit of the Declaration of Independence. We've got to overcome the exceptions and the violations that they had and build on the good stuff that they had. And if we stick with our principles and we stick with integrity and we keep speaking the truth, as things get worse and people start suffering more, and they're going to, because it's on the horizon, they will start looking for answers. And we've got the answers. If we stick with our principles, we stick with our integrity, we keep speaking the truth, we have the potential not just to lead this country, we have the potential to lead the people of the world to the highest reaches of freedom, out of this socialist morass, this statist morass, onto freedom and free markets and freedom of choice. Thank you very much. Bob. Thank you.
Okay, would I be correct to assume that you are saying that things are going to get worse before they get better?
Yeah, the question is, am I saying that things are going to get worse before they get better? And of course, I can't predict the future, but I don't see how they can help it get worse. Especially on the economic front. You see, and I haven't even talked about the foreign policy front tonight. Things are just as bad, if not worse, there. But the government spending, I don't see anything letting up on government spending. Nobody's talking about abolishing any of the programs that all this money is going to. All you hear is talk about tinkering. We're going to have the bureaucrats cut 10% of their budgets and so forth. The military-industrial complex. When you look at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the entitlements, the military, nobody's talking about abolishing any of those. I don't see how this thing can end well. Their only hope, the status is, let's print the money that artificially stimulates the economy. Now, what they mean by that is, let's get more people to work that can pay the taxes that can fund this whole thing. We've been saying for decades, how long can they keep this house of cards going? Well, they may keep it going. I can't predict that, but I don't see it. I think this last thing may have been as scary as they say, where, the FDIC is broke for all practical purposes. Everybody thinks that their monies are insured. That's all fine and good if 3 or 4 banks fail. But would someone like to tell me what happens if there's an industry-wide banking collapse? Where are they going to get that $250,000 per person that's going to fund everybody's deposits back? I'll tell you where they're going to get it. They're going to tax you. To pay you back your $20,000 bank deposit, they're going to tax you $20,000 to pay, because that's the only place government gets. I can't predict the future, Bob, I'm no prognosticator, but I say prepare yourself for the storm, the perfect storm, not only domestically but in foreign policy. I think you've got a twin storm here, with Iraq, Afghanistan, the empire, possibly Korea, Iran. Things do not look good. But things can always turn around. So, you never know. Yes, Mike?
When things get bad economically, instead of things tipping towards liberty, aren't you more afraid that we'll have rioting in the streets the way they have in Greece, and then perhaps end up with a dictator like Hitler?
Yeah, the question is isn't there a good possibility that if things go wrong economically, things get worse, that you end up with a dictator like, in Germany, Hitler? Absolutely. That's what's so dangerous about this situation, is that, look at what happened in the Great Depression. What'd they blame it on? They blamed it on free enterprise. Even today, in every government school textbook, free enterprise failed. Well, that's just nonsense. You know, as the Austrian economists have shown, as Milton Friedman showed, what caused the stock market crash in 29 was the Federal Reserve's monetary manipulations. And the Federal Reserve, of course, was a central bank that had been brought in to stabilize money. Well, of course, that was nonsense. The central bank was brought up to finance the debt that the government wanted to keep spending money. And it was that monetary manipulation in the 20s that brought the stock market crash. Well, then what do? Do they rectify the problem by abolishing the central bank? No. They did what you suggest. They turned to Roosevelt, the man on the white horse. The Germans did the same thing. They turned to Hitler. And by the way, there's very many similarities between Hitler's economic program and Franklin Roosevelt's. I mean, remember, Roosevelt got his idea for Social Security from Otto von Bismarck, which is the same place Hitler got his idea for Social Security, and both of them got them from the German socialists at the late 1800s. I mean, it's not a coincidence that if you go to the Social Security Administration's website, you see a bust not of Madison or Jefferson or Washington, you see a bust of Otto von Bismarck. It's the most bizarre thing you've ever seen. But the reason they turned to Roosevelt was what you suggested. The man on the white horse, he's going to save us. And he saves us with dictatorial powers, and that's what the National Industrial Recovery Act was all about. So that is the danger. Now, the counter to that is that people start asking questions and challenging. You know, we talked about the Tea Party earlier. And I think the real big positive thing about the Tea Party is, you know, they're seeing the glass darkly. They don't see that there's only one solution. In case anybody hadn't got this yet, there's only one solution to the woes that afflict this nation, and that's libertarian principles. There's no other way, my friends. This is the only solution. Well, they're not looking at that. They're still looking at, we can reform these programs, we can reduce government spending, they're tinkering. But the good thing about the Tea Party is at least they're asking questions, and they're challenging things like government spending and stuff. They haven't figured out what the solution is yet, but hey, if you're just robotically saying yes whenever government says something, you got no chance at all. So at least they're asking questions. Yes.
Speaking of asking questions, there's a libertarian organization that makes a lot of the idea that Ron Paul's Audit the Fed bill and things he said during his presidential run brought an awareness about the antics of the Fed that has really never existed in this country before, and they are suggesting that that's a really good sign. Do you see any significance in that movement about questioning the Fed?
Okay, the question is do I see any significance in what Ron Paul accomplished in getting people to question the Fed? And I might add other things, if you don't mind my answering that as well. Absolutely. I mean, the Ron Paul phenomenon has been, very possibly the most exciting thing that's happened to the libertarian movement in the whole time I've been involved in it. I mean, it's just, I admire Ron. He's one of my real heroes, but I'm not really sure it was Ron that did this. I think it was there, and Ron just happened to be the right person at the right time. And not only did he get people to question the Fed, I mean, it was incredible. I've seen what, in talking to college students where they're all chanting, in the Fed, in the Fed. It's like, wow, that's like, I never thought I'd hear that. People recognize the dangers that a central bank has. So it's incredible what he's accomplished, but also in foreign policy. And when he took on Giuliani in that question, and he told us, I was at a dinner one time with him or a meeting, and he said that when he answered that question, and he saw the reaction, and he hung in there, and he said, they attacked us because of what our government's been doing over there. He felt his heart just sort of fall. There goes the campaign. And I was there saying, yeah, man, speaking the truth. And sure enough, that's what galvanized his support, was he was pointing to the government's not only doing bad things to people here at home, like they had done at Waco and Ruby Ridge, which they've been doing bad things to people in Iraq, to people in the Middle East, and this is what Americans don't want to think about. They don't want to think about their government does bad things, not just here, but over there. And that people finally retaliated for that. They'd had enough. And that's where I think Ron has just been fantastic. And I've seen these people, he's like a rock star. And also the other great phenomenon in this movement is Andrew Napolitano, who's had this Freedom Watch, where he's having all these radical libertarians on Fox News internet program. And I guess most of you know that he's going live on Fox Business Network, I think this month. They finally gave him his own show. And you've got groups like Campaign for Liberty, and you've got Young Americans for Freedom, and the Students for Liberty, and then you've got a ladies group called Ladies of Liberty Alliance, LOLA. And they're all young people, and they're all in this because of what Ron Paul generated. But I think it's because of a lot of what you guys have done here. It wasn't just Ron. Those of you that have been fighting in this movement for years and years, all your efforts are paying off now. When you see the results of how the politicians are galvanizing the sport, like Ron Paul, it's the work you've done, the work we've done, and all the think tanks and so forth. To me, these are exciting times. There was a famous exchange between two of the founding fathers. I think it was Adams and Paine, and I forget which one was which. I'm not sure. But one said, "Wherever there is liberty, that is my home." And I think it was Paine that responded, "Oh, wherever there is not liberty, that is my home." And we're born in an age in which there is not liberty. And there's a challenge to that. It's exciting. It's exciting to be involved in this. I consider this the grandest, most glorious cause you could ever be involved in. I mean, heaven forbid we should ever win this thing and we don't get to have meetings like this anymore, and Future Freedom Foundation goes out of existence, So I often joke with people, we want to advance liberty, we don't want to achieve it. I think it's been a phenomenal thing that Ron Paul's done. Anybody else? Yeah.
I know that there's the Tea Parties are out there with a local presence, but I was reading a post from Sheriff Richard Mack, and he said, the Tea Parties are nice, and he said, what we also need to worry about are what the states are doing. Is there anything that the states can do with measures like lawsuits, challenging federal government, nullification? What's the practical program that we could use for, turning the screws on our state legislators to help them put the federal government into work?
Now that's a great question. The question is, what can be done at the state level to affect things in a pro-freedom direction in Washington? Because obviously it's very difficult to change things in Washington. Just to digress a second, I think one of the places not really digression, one of the places we really have a chance to win, I think, during the Obama first administration, or if he wins re-election, the second administration, where we really have a shot is on the drug war. I mean, this thing's gone on for 35 years, and it's produced horror, just horror. I mean, I grew up on the border in Laredo, Texas, and my friends, we used to go across the river, without my parents' permission, of course, when we were teenagers, and we'd drink and have a good time. And my friends tell me now that nobody goes across the river, that it's just so dangerous with the kidnappings and the killings. I mean, they have totally destroyed tourism along the border. And that's the drug war. It's not drugs, it's the drug war. And I think we've got a shot to do that. Now, California is doing a really interesting experiment along the lines you're talking about. I mean, they've got an initiative on the ballot to legalize marijuana. And it looks like it might pass, which I think is going to be a real shot heard around the world. I mean, here's a state that has legalized at least one drug. I mean, we really need to legalize the whole bunch. But, wow, that's not just medicinal marijuana. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a conflict here now where the feds are the only ones enforcing the drug war in California, and the state cops are finally doing what they're supposed to be doing and protecting people from the murderers and the rapists and the burglars and so forth. I think that type of thing can well be done. But it's difficult. I mean, what difference does it make whether you repeal a minimum wage law at the state level if the federal minimum wage law still applies? The idea of nullification is fine, but, I mean, how effective can that be? I mean, there was a civil war fought over that sort of issue. I'm not sure the feds would ever tolerate it. I think they'd send in troops again. I mean, ultimately, I think change has to happen within the body politic, and I got a feeling it's going to happen sort of all at once, where if it's happening at the state level, and, most politicians to me are like chameleons. They'll take the see how things are changing, and they'll go with the wind, but One other thing I was going to ask you a question. Walter Williams came up with a great idea once where he said, you know how the feds always threaten the cutoff of highway funds and stuff if you don't do what they say. He said that the state governors ought to have everybody send their income taxes into the state. And then when the federal government finally straightened out its act, they would release the funds to the IRS. I thought that was an intriguing way to control the government, but
that is still actually being considered in several states.
Is it?
Any funding that the federal government would request would have to go to the state treasury department if it didn't meet one of the general enumerated purposes of national defense, the infrastructure or borders. They wouldn't get the funding. The same way there's another one on the books in some states to say that any federal agent that executes a warrant would require the approval of the county sheriff.
See, I think all those movements are fantastic because it's people that are now starting to become aware. In psychology, there's something like alcoholics and stuff that if an alcoholic doesn't know he's an alcoholic, well, he's got no chance. I mean, it's like that 12-step program, or is it 12-step, right? Where you have to acknowledge you got a problem. And a lot of people are just they've got this thing over this crust over their minds. But people are becoming aware. They're becoming aware that they're not free, that something's wrong in this country. And so all these movements at the local level and the state level and challenging the police and challenging authority and so forth, especially abuse of authority, the videotaping of cops that are beating people up and stuff, all this is fantastic. Because what we've got to restore is a system where government officials fear us. You see, right now we live in a society where everybody fears the government. Everybody lives in fear of the IRS. There's not a person around that you get a letter from the IRS that you don't get nervous. And rightfully so. They're a very, very tyrannical, abusive agency. And it's like any government. You have banking regulators. A bank president may be the most powerful guy in the community. But when a bank regulator walks into a bank, he shivers in fear. And I think what we need to do is restore what you're talking about, is where people are not afraid of their government officials, but it's the government officials that are afraid of us, where they become truly our servants. And we're the masters. And that's been inverted. We look at them as our daddy. They are providing us our sustenance, our retirement, our education, our health care. They're our God in a sense. We've substituted them for our other God, the God we pray to on Sundays. The God that says, through the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread. Oh, this God says, don't worry, I'll just steal from part of your neighbors here and I'll give you your money. And I think that we need to restore that sense, where the citizen is sovereign and the government is servant. Yes, sir. One more, Bob? Okay. Yeah, it very well could be. It says it could be a year, 2 years. Impossible to time it. I mean, if we could time it, we'd all be millionaires, so we go short the dollar. So we never know. But I don't see how it cannot end that. I mean, they're very lucky right now. I mean, people are fleeing the euro, and there's only 2 places they can go. Or maybe 3 if they want to invest in Chinese money. But really, they're going into the dollar, which is keeping the dollar sound, and they can go into gold. But ultimately, if the Fed's doing what I think they're doing, they're cranking up the printing presses. Through the banks. They're expanding money through the banks, through the reserve requirements and so forth. I mean, it's a complicated process, but that's how they do it. We're on the road to Greece, where all of a sudden you've got U.S. government bonds are now no AAA. And you see it happening at the state level right now, where they're downgrading the state bonds because state governments are in the same shape, if not worse, than the federal government. The difference being that they can't print up the money to pay off their bonds. But I agree with you, and let me tell you what I think one of the most despicable things these people have ever done. And it's just amazing to me that no one's taken into account on this. I grew up in an era where these sadists sent 58,000 of my generation to their deaths in Vietnam. And I spent 4 years at Virginia Military Institute listening to them call out guys that had graduated from VMI, killed in action. I'm one of those that says this was an idiotic, stupid, destructive, illegal war, no declaration of war from Congress. It was based on lies. And they sent all these men to their death. And let me tell you who was furnishing the weaponry. It wasn't just the Soviet Union that was furnishing the weaponry that was killing those American GIs. It was the Chinese Communist regime as well. And the fact that these people have put this nation into hock to this same communist regime to fund their imperial enterprises in Iraq and Afghanistan, which, by the way, have produced this ever-perpetual threat of terrorism, which they then use to take away our civil liberties, is one of the most shameful and despicable things in the world. I mean, the Chinese Communist regime is this country's principal foreign creditor. And this is why that government officials now go over there and they get on their knees and they kiss the rings of these communists, because they don't dare antagonize their lenders. Because let me tell you something, what you're talking about, sir, is exactly what's going to happen if these communists decide one day to dump all these government securities they're owning, all these bonds, onto the market. You're going to see a monetary crisis the likes of which you can't even imagine. Now, people say they'd never do that because it would hurt them. Bull. That politics prevails over everything. And if they decide one day to just dump all of their U.S. bonds on the market on the same day, there is no telling what's going to happen in terms of monetary chaos in this country and financial chaos. That's, I think, of all the things they've done, invade a country that never attacked the United States, sanction people that killed 500,000 Iraqi children, all the things they've done, the unconditional support to the Israeli government, the military approach to Afghanistan, the killing of all the bridal parties, all that stuff. I think this ranks right up there, borrowing the money to do it all from the Chinese communists, the same regime that killed people in the Americans in the Vietnam War. Shameful. So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you very much again for coming, and thank you very much for having me.
Here's a man who just got out of a sick bed to come here. Let's give Bumper a standing ovation. He got out of a sick bed to be here tonight.